we're going to get started here in just a second. Thank you. Hey. Thank you all so much for joining us for Superior on Tap on this very wintry evening. It was snowing earlier today, so I'm glad you all made it here safely. Or I hope you all made it here safely. It means a lot that you're here. My name's Jane. I'm the director of Citizens for a Safe and Clean Lake Superior. We are a small environmental nonprofit here in Marquette. Our name essentially spells out our mission, which is to protect Lake Superior's watershed and the Upper Peninsula from environmental threats. We've been hosting Superior on Tap community lectures over the past year as part of our efforts to protect wetlands in the Superior watershed and to satisfy my post-grad desires for education. And I'm very excited for tonight's presentation about the Strangmoor Bog. A quick note about tonight's event. Our work focuses pretty directly on environmental issues, but we realize it's hard for people to fight for our shared environment when they don't have food to put on the table. We see the record numbers of people utilizing community food assistance due to cuts to services at the federal level, and so we'll be sharing donations from tonight's event with the local St. Vinny's Food Bank so they can go on supporting our neighbors in need. And if you'd like to make a donation, we've got little jars at either of the doors, and there's also a QR code so you can donate online if you don't have cash. Now, for our presentation, I'm excited to learn along with you about the mysteries of the Strangmoor Bog, a rare wetland ecosystem preserved within the Seney National Wildlife Refuge. For those who don't know, Seney is about an hour and a half east of Marquette and provides critical habitat for many different species as well as really awesome recreation opportunities. And fun fact, today is actually the refuge's 90th birthday. I know, right? So what better way to celebrate it than to learn about it? Now to introduce our speaker, Sara Giles is a recently retired park ranger with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. Her 27-year federal career spanned 2 countries, 5 states, and 3 National Wildlife Refuges, as well as service in the Peace Corps. Throughout her career, Sara led public programs, advanced habitat restoration efforts, and most recently helped design the new visitor center at Seney, which is currently under development. Since retiring in May 2025, Sara has continued to share her passion for art, nature, and science through community involvement, serving on our local school board, and volunteering in the schools. She lives over in Gulliver and enjoys exploring the outdoors, raising her 2 kids, traveling, and spending time with her husband and their dogs. So if we could all please give a warm welcome to our presenter, Ms. Sara Giles.
Thank you. Wave at me. All right. Hopefully everyone can hear me all right, and I don't trip over the cords up here. So, all right. It's been a while since I've done a presentation in front of people, so hopefully it'll all come back. So once again, I just wanted to point out it is Seney's 90th birthday, and I wanted to just give a little fun fact about Seney. This is our logo that we have. It is a blue goose, or sorry, not a blue goose. That's the logo for the Wildlife Refuge system. It is a Canada goose. And the reason why it's a Canada goose is, I don't know if you knew this, but back early in the 1900s, there were very few Canada geese left. It's hard to believe today, I know. But there were actually very few left, and the refuge, when it was established in 1935, the following summer in 1936, they found a farmer downstate who had preserved 350 pinioned Canada geese, and they brought them up here to the Upper Peninsula, to Seney, to raise them and propagate them on the refuge so that they could go forth into the future. It was before the Endangered Species Act, but it was obviously, along with other efforts to bring back waterfowl, it was very successful. People sometimes consider them to be nuisances nowadays, but I don't like to think of them that way. I like to think that we build the perfect habitat for them, and then we expect them not to go there. So anyway, has anybody been to the Seney National Wildlife Refuge? Oh, good, quite a few of you have. How about, has anybody been to a bog before? All right, quite a few people. How about a patterned bog? We've got, a few people, excellent. Well, fun story. I have never been out to our patterned bog because I have a bad knee and I'm terrified that the trek through, the wilderness and the bog, I'll end up hurting myself and then I'll get stranded out there. So I have not been, but I would love to go. And after researching this, I think that I know where I can go to get a good view of a bog so that I don't have to trek all the way through our wilderness area to get there. So it is not actually a bog though, and we're going to talk about that very shortly here. If I can get my slide to advance. Okay, I'm just going to go. That's okay. I'm adaptable. Okay, so where are patterned fens, patterned bogs, Strangmoor bogs, patterned peatlands? They have a lot of different names depending on where you are in the world. They are exclusively in the northern hemisphere, and they are far to the north in the hemisphere. They generally occur where glacial outwash has occurred. So Russia, Scandinavia, there's a few in like Iceland, Ireland, Scotland, Alaska, Canada, and then here, okay, it did work that time. Here we've got a big concentration in the eastern portion of the Upper Peninsula. There's a couple in Wisconsin, but I think that they only know of about 3 of them in Wisconsin. And then there's a big complex up in northern Minnesota and a few others around in northern Minnesota. So, and I believe that there's a few smaller ones like out in New York State and those areas. Here in Michigan, this dark green area, that is the biggest concentration, with a few others located in this light green area there. So you can see there are a few throughout the Upper Peninsula. The biggest concentration is in Schoolcraft County, where the refuge is located. This is a map of the refuge, of course, and I had to kind of eyeball it, but the Strangmoor Bog is not quite 10,000 acres in the western portion of the refuge, and you can kind of see this landscape right here. That is the patterned peatland that we're going to be talking about tonight. There is a ditch that runs down through the refuge here called the Walsh Ditch. It's 14 miles long, and I'll talk about that again later in the presentation. But it was an attempt to drain all the wetlands on the refuge before it was actually a refuge. And so it has left scars behind. And I think had that not been there, this patterned fen would be, a little bit bigger. So, but we will cross that bridge when we get there. So the Strangmoor Bog is a national natural landmark, which I had to look up what that was because I didn't really know what that program was. It's a program that was started in 1964, and it highlights examples of significant, like natural history things. It might be geology, it might be a landscape, something like that. So there are 606 of them as of 2024 throughout the United States and its territories. So you can find them all over the place. Not every state has one. Michigan has 12, so we have quite a few. Like the Porcupine Mountains, a lot of you have probably been there. Some of the other ones, I don't really know. I'm not a native Michigander, so I don't know where all of them are. Duke's natural area, Marquette. So, and they can be either on state land or federal land, or some of them are even in private ownership. So it doesn't really matter who the owner is. If it's cool enough, it can be enrolled in this program. So, all right. So the bog itself. So when we think about it, I've got 2 pictures kind of combined here. So this is slightly further out, and this is more, zoomed in from above. So on the landscape there, we've got strings or strags, which is where the name Strangmoor comes from. And those are high points on the land, and then flarks, which are like hollows that are low parts on the land where the water can collect. You don't always see the water on there. If it is a dry time of year, the water might not be visible from above. But these pictures mainly that I'm going to show you tonight were taken usually in May, because that's when you can usually see them the best. But they look sort of like, I don't know, a wrinkly dog, a zebra's stripes. You pick something wrinkly and you see. Then we've got these higher areas within them. Those are what I'm going to be referring to as pine islands. That's what I've always called them. I think in some texts you'll find other names, but I don't know those names. And then they've also got these little areas which I call they're kind of like a water shadow, but I'm going to get into those in a little bit. So, okay, so where did they come from? So we have to go back in time to when the glaciers were here. So we're going back 10, 11,000 years. So we've got the Laurentian ice sheet here, and then this here is Glacial Lake Algonquin. It's basically Lake Michigan here, Lake Huron here, and it's slightly bigger. So this ice sheet was acting as a big dam holding in all the water until it melted back far enough that it released a lot of the water. And that, you can see, this is where the refuge is approximately. It was underneath that lake, so it was the lake bottom. So what happened is, over time, when the lake drained away, it left about 15 to 200 feet of sand in a poorly drained area. So it's a nice flat, mostly flat area, except for those little pine islands we were talking about. Okay, so after that happened, then peat started to grow on those areas because it's a old lake bottom, so it has water on it still, even though most of the lake drained away. So we've got the sphagnum moss there growing and dying and growing and dying and growing and dying. And of course, the water is there, so it never fully goes away. So it just accumulates a little bit over time. So it's going to grow up a few inches every century. It grows really slow. So it takes millennia for these bogs to form, and they don't start out as strings and flarks. They don't start out as a strangmoor or patterned peatland. At first, they might be something more like a muskeg or just like a regular kind of bog until they get big enough, okay? So these are pretty large-scale wetlands. So this one is what's called a digital ortho map, and you can see it uses a slightly different kind of film, or, well, not film anymore, but this was taken in 2006, or 2008. 1998, I don't know what year. So this was taken in 1998. It probably was filmed at that time. But these, you can see the striping. So we've got the little stripes there, the strings and the flarks. Strings, again, are the high points, flarks are the low points. We've got the pine islands here, 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 and you can see the water is a darker color. So the water is flowing from north to south. So this is north, this is south. So the water in a fen, which the Strangmoor Bog is not named correctly, I'm assuming it's kind of like a Pluto thing, where in the 70s when they named it, they hadn't quite worked out the definition yet, so they called it a bog because they didn't know what else to call it. And then science moved on and marched on, and it's got the name in the Federal Register as the bog. And then they decided to, define what a bog is versus what a fen is, which we'll get into next. But I'm assuming it's kind of like that. So Pluto was a planet until 2008, and then they changed it to a dwarf planet. So my guess is this was a bog, and then when they changed the definition, now it's a fen. So Fens have flowing water. That's the main thing you got to remember. So we've got water flowing from the north to the south on a gentle slope. It's about a 2% grade, so it goes down just a couple feet a mile. And what nobody really knows how these little strings and flarks form, but they have a couple ideas. The first idea was that they formed because of permafrost. That's when, they found these in higher northern latitudes when it never, fully thawed. But in Michigan, our ground does thaw. So they're like, well, there goes that idea. It's not that. So instead, what they decide happened is maybe peat creep, they're calling it. So like imagine you've got just a slight little, decline, and the peat's starting to get kind of heavy, and the water's kind of flowing through it a little bit. So maybe over time it kind of pushes it a little bit, and things get scrunched up. So eventually you get these little strings and flarks happening. And you've got little things out there, like these pine islands. There might be stuff buried under there, or maybe there's plants growing that are kind of rooting certain parts to the ground. And so that also makes it so that it might stop some of that from sliding a little bit. So anyway, that's the current thinking, is that they're formed because of that peat creep, if you will. These features are pretty interesting. So you've got the pine island here. You can see they kind of act almost like a little dam. So on the north side, where the water's coming from, a lot of times they'll form like a little pool there. It'll collect water, and there'll be a little wetland there. On the other side, so we've got the pine island here, we got one here. As the water's flowing this way, it kind of almost makes like a little shadow of water, so it doesn't infiltrate, the water doesn't infiltrate this. It's kind of like the water got stopped there, and it didn't easily flow beyond that. So that also changes the way that the plants grow there on the south side of that pine island. It gets a little less moisture, so you can get, more shrubs and trees and stuff growing. So now you get to see my artwork here, because I could not find the cross section that I wanted, so I had to make my own. But we've got the sand, so remember, anywhere from 15 to 200 feet of sand, fairly flat, a 2% slope. We've got the peat that's been accumulating for thousands of years, and then we've got the strings, and different plants grow on the strings than they do in the flarks. So on the strings, they're a little bit higher up, so we can get things that are a little bit bigger, like we might get some shrubs, like tag alder or something like that. And then in the flarks, we get a lot more sphagnum down there because they're always wet. Maybe we got some cranberries growing in there. And the water level fluctuates a little bit, so some times of the year you're not going to see it above the sphagnum. Other times you will see it above the sphagnum. But it's fed by rain and snow, runoff, and groundwater or water from streams. So this is what it actually looks like on the ground. This is my friend Jen walking out here. So here's the string, and you can see we've got a bunch of, this one has a bunch of ferns growing on it, a few shrubs, and then in the flark, you can't really see the sphagnum, but there's a bunch of little sedges and stuff growing in there. So, and I think this picture was taken in August, so it was a little bit easier to walk in, but if you went out there in the spring, no matter what time of year you go out there, make sure you wear boots that are waterproof, because otherwise you're going to get really, really wet. Okay, so how do you tell a bog from a fen? So bogs are umbrotrophic. I hope I said that correctly. They only get water from precipitation, so rain, snow, that kind of thing. They are nutrient poor because of that. They aren't able to get a lot of nutrients coming in from elsewhere. They're acidic, about the same acidic level as a glass of orange juice, so about 4 pH. And only a few really hardy species can live in them. Versus a fen, which is mine-trophic, it gets water from groundwater and streams or precipitation, and precipitation. Because of that, it gets more minerals washing into it. So it has slightly more nutrients coming in, and it's only slightly acidic. So instead of being 4, it's about a 5 or a 6, depending on how much water flow is coming in. And it has a greater diversity of plants because of that. Something else interesting, this is an infrared photo, and I just included it because you can kind of see, it's kind of neat to look at the different kinds of pictures that they take. But another thing, this water, if you were to like take a cup of it and look at it, it would be a little bit orangish, and that's because there's a lot of water, or a lot of iron in our water up here, and it does precipitate out and form little clumps, and they're called bog iron. And one of the things that early pioneers thought was, well, we'll go out and pick up the bog iron. Can't be too hard to find some out there, and it's not. But when you think about slogging through this with something that weighs as much as a chunk of iron, you're not going to get very far. So they kind of abandoned that. It became more of like a curiosity kind of thing than anything else. But if any of those of you who have been to the refuge, you know, like if you're going on the Marshland Wildlife Drive, any birds that are in the water that usually are white usually have some dye in their feathers, so they look like they have like red on their necks or heads, because like the swans have their head down in the muck all the time, and it gets that iron on there, and so they change color over time. Something else interesting about looking at these aerial photos, can you imagine being a refuge manager or a hydrologist or something, and the first airplanes are invented, and they go up and they start flying around, and you've only ever seen this from the ground until now, and then they start taking pictures and they bring it back, and you're like, holy cow, how is that so striped like that? That must have been quite the experience once you get that technology. I just was thinking about that while I was making this presentation. Okay, so let's get into what lives out here in the bog. So, moose, do you think moose are going to live out in the bog? Maybe, probably more like on the edges, but it's going to be challenging for a moose if you think about how hard it is to walk in there. When I was working at the refuge, I'd go out and sometimes I would see moose tracks going through the sphagnum. So, yep, they'll go out there, but they're probably not going to go into the heart of the bog. They could get stuck and not able to get out. Harrier hawks, this is a northern harrier. Lots and lots of insects, but we'll get into those in a bit. So the building block of the bogs, as we were talking about earlier, is that sphagnum bog, or sphagnum moss. So there are several different kinds of sphagnum moss that you can find out and about. So I'm not a moss expert, but they are pretty cool. Just a fun fact, if you dry out, sphagnum moss holds about 25 times its own weight in water, and if you dry it out, indigenous people used it for diapers and for women during that time of the month. Also, it was used to pack wounds because of it's slightly acidic, it's an antiseptic. I wouldn't suggest, we have better options nowadays, but you could, back when that was your only option, that was something you could do. There are several other kinds of moss that are also out in the bogs, not just the sphagnum moss, but they might be growing in different areas. So, and they're just so cool. There's such a diversity of shapes and colors with moss, and their little spore caps that I didn't put any of those on here, but I always love seeing the little spore caps that are sticking up above the moss to spread their little spores. Lots of different kinds of grasses and sedges. So different grasses and sedges grow in the low parts versus the high parts. My favorite is the cotton grass. When you're out there looking around, there's like a little piece of grass sticking up with like a little floof of cotton on it, and they usually grow in kind of big colonies, and I always think that they're fun to see. Everybody loves carnivorous plants. In the UP, we have 3 different kinds of carnivorous plants. We've got, of course, the pitcher plants, we've got the sundews, and we've got the bladderworts, and I'll spend a little bit of time talking about those because I love carnivorous plants. I think they're really cool. So the purple pitcher plant is the kind of pitcher plant we have here in the UP. They, of course, have these pitchers that hold water, and they have like digestive enzymes in them. And you guys probably remember this from school, but I'll go over it anyway. They're kind of slippery around the edges, and then they've got all these little hairs that you can see. And if you notice, all the hairs are pointing down towards that pitcher. And so if you're an insect flying around out there, and you're like, ooh, that's a pretty color, I'm gonna go explore it, see if there's something, if it's food, and you land on this, and then you slip, and you're like, whoa, and then you fall into this little cup of water here, then you're doomed. And we've got a bunch of little insects in here. Not all of them always die. Some of them actually can live in there, but some of them drowned, and then they're eaten by the other little insects that live in there, or sometimes frogs live in there, whatever. But they're in there, they die, and then they get digested. And why the plant does that is because it's a nutrient-poor environment. They need a little bit of nitrogen help. So when they are digested, they give off nitrogen, and then the plant absorbs that, and it helps them survive in that nutrient-poor environment. So the pitcher plants can live a long time, and you can see here, these are the newer pitchers, and there's some older ones that are decaying down here at the bottom. So, and that's what the pitcher plant's flower looks like. Sundews, we have 2 or 3 different kinds of sundews in the UP. I always thought that they would be bigger, but when I saw my first sundew, I was like, wow, that's really tiny. They're only about the size of like a 50-cent piece, so they're very, very tiny, but they do live in big colonies. So if you can find one and you look around, there's usually like thousands in the same area. So, and they like wet areas, so you usually find them, and they have wet feet, so they're, sometimes you can even find them growing on the side of the road if you look in like wet areas that look like they're wet a lot. They've got these little tiny, almost like a finger, and then on the end of those there's like a little dollop of dew, and that dew is kind of sticky. So if you're an insect and you land on that, there's a good chance you're going to kind of get stuck there. And then the little leaf slowly closes up around you, and then it digests you slowly over time. So it would not be a pleasant way to go, I'm sure. But they're pretty little plants nonetheless, and they do get like little tiny shoot that comes up out of the middle, and it'll have a bunch of little white flowers on it. They're real pretty and delicate, and if you're looking for a big one, that's not the one you're looking for. They are very, very tiny. So just remember, you can stop and look in puddles and see if you can find some. And then the last one is the bladderwort, and they have these little tiny bladders here. So this is the part that lives up above the water. Sometimes you'll just see like out in the middle of a pond, there'll be like a little tiny stem sticking up with a little yellow flower on it. Sometimes you'll see them growing in the sand next to a pond. Sometimes you'll see them growing out of other vegetation, but they have these they almost look like roots in the water. So this is part, and then this is another part of it. And these little teeny things are called bladders, and they're flat when they're not full, and they've got little tiny hairs that stick up, and they're about the size of a pinhead, so they're really, really small. And when a little teeny tiny insect or a little baby fish or something swims by it and triggers this little hair that's here, it triggers it to open and suck in a bunch of water, and it's hoping to suck in that plant or that little animal into their bladder to digest it, and that's how it gets its food. So other things out in the bog are orchids. So the orchids that we have here are the dragon's mouth and the grass pink orchid. There are other orchids that live on the refuge, some more that live out in the bog, but these are the ones I chose to show you tonight. They're really beautiful little orchids. I didn't know this until yesterday, but their seeds are super duper tiny, and they don't have enough food to help them grow. So they don't really know if they're a parasite with mycorrhizal fungus or if they give anything back to the fungus. But without the fungus, those little seeds are doomed. They can't grow. They can't absorb enough food to get going. So I thought that was kind of interesting. But moving on to some of the bigger plants out there, we've got the heath plants. A lot of the plants that you find out in the bogs are heath plants. They tend to do well in acidic soils, and then some things like tag alder and stuff like that. But here we've got the bog Labrador tea, and I always thought that the flowers kind of look a little bit like blueberry flowers, which makes sense because blueberries are in the same family, and you can also find them growing out in the bog. Bog laurel, which are just gorgeous little pink flowers. Cranberries, and this is Labrador tea, which you can actually make tea out of, but they don't suggest you drink very much of it because it is somewhat toxic, and it's also called, I think, drunkards, what did they call it? Drunkard's tea is its nickname, because if you drink too much tea from it, you'll start feeling kind of loopy and not good because you poisoned yourself. So keep that in mind. There's ferns out there as well, so we got some sensitive ferns, marsh ferns, and my favorite ones are the royal ferns. They're just really beautiful. But these are all the different things that the animals that live out in the bog can feast upon. So, and then trees. The trees do not tend to do super well out in the bog, so when they can grow, they're stunted because, they're always got wet feet, they're always in a little bit acidic area, and they don't have a ton of nutrients coming in. So all of these trees can grow out there, but they don't grow very big. It's more of an endurance thing. It takes them a long time to get going and get bigger. And fun fact, if you didn't know, tamaracks are the only evergreen in our area, at least that I know of, that actually lose their needles in the winter. So a couple of months ago, when you were driving around out there, you might have seen a bunch of really beautiful golden trees. Those were the tamaracks getting ready to shed their needles for the winter. Of course, birds have an easier time getting around out there because they have wings and they can fly, and it's not hard for them to walk around in the bog. So there are quite a few different kinds of birds that you can find out in bogs, including sandhill cranes, spruce grouse. This is a yellow rail. Seney used to do yellow rail tours. We don't do them anymore, but they're kind of fun. They've a really weird little sound that you can make by, it sounds like a typewriter, so you can be like tick, 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 or tapping two stones together. Sometimes fools them into thinking that you're another yellow rail talking to them. You don't want to do that too much because you can really mess with a bird and make them stop eating or something to come over and try to defend their territory. But and then merlins. Lots of different frogs out in the bog, obviously. This one's a mink frog. I've heard if you smell them, they're supposed to smell kind of stinky like a mink would. But I have smelled mink frogs, and I've never had that experience. So I tried, but I failed. Wood frogs, also another kind of frog that you might find out there. And of course, lots and lots and lots of different kinds of insects. These are just a few of the insects that are a little more rare. So including the Heinz emerald dragonfly, which I believe is this one. And they are an endangered species. So they like to live out in the bog. And maybe there's more of them than we know. It's just really hard to go out there and find them because it's so dang hard to get out to the bog. But I doubt that. So, all right, and before we did talk about the moose, actually the large mammal that would have been out there a long time ago would have been the caribou, but we haven't had them in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan for a very long time. So wolves might use the area and pass through, but a lot of the animals, the mammals that you're going to find out in the bogs are the little guys. And this is a star-nosed mole here. Star-nosed moles are semi-aquatic mammals, so they actually spend a lot of time swimming. And when we were planning for the new visitor center, we decided to make this guy one of the ones that you could kind of learn more about. So if you come out there when the new one's open, there will be a drawer you can open up and look at one of these little guys. But one of the cool things I learned about them when planning for the new visitor center is they can smell underwater. So they've got those little fingers on their nose, which help them sense things, right? But they can also, when they're underwater, blow a bubble out. They kind of trap it in their little tentacles, and it absorbs air from the surrounding water, and then they suck it back in, and they can smell what's nearby them in the water using that technique, which is wild. And if you go on YouTube, when you get home tonight, you can look it up, and they have like a slow-mo video of swimming star-nosed mole doing that technique, which is really cool in my opinion. So, but other little mammals will be out there too, probably, you know, lemmings and voles, mice, probably the odd squirrel here and there on the Pine Islands, you know, whatever you find, mink, because there's going to be things hunting these guys. So, but mostly the aquatic animals. So, beaver are not going to be like right out in the swamp, or not in the bog, but they do help create bogs. So here again, here's that ditch, the Walsh ditch coming through here, going down there. So that was dug in order for people to try to farm this land, right? So you can kind of see the scar of it. Beavers and refuge managers have been out there trying to plug the ditch. And when they did that, they were successful in getting some of the water to flow back in the natural channel, which is right here. But beavers play a role in helping out with our bogs. So, okay. So bogs are more than meet the eye. They are like a giant sponge. So you got to think about that during heavy rains. The rainfall comes in, the bog is going to absorb it, and then downstream it'll help prevent flooding. So they are a very important part, and then they also slowly release water into the system over time. So it helps during droughts as well. The water flowing through the bog, it cleans the water. So if there's a lot of excess nutrients from like people, you know, putting nutrients on their lawn or whatever, it absorbs that and takes it out of the system. So the water coming out of the other side of the bog, although you wouldn't want to drink it because it is kind of brown, orange, you know, it's not going to be like you want to drink it, but it is way cleaner than when it went in. Also, climate change, it helps a lot. Bogs are only like 3% of the land out there in the world, but they hold 20 to 30% of the carbon dioxide. So they are carbon sinks, so they're very important. And even though it's not as biodiverse as somewhere like a rainforest, it still has a lot of biodiversity and unique biodiversity to this kind of habitat. So you're not just going to find these plants and the animals, well, some of the animals you'll find other places, but the plants, you're not going to necessarily find them everywhere. I can't speak a lot to before settlers came in because I don't know enough about the indigenous communities and how they used bogs, but I can say that the stewardship of the land that they did before settlers came definitely impacted the Upper Peninsula. So things like cultural burning and stuff like that would have kept areas more open, because over time, if you think about it, if no fires go through an area like that, trees can start to encroach and they take a lot of water out of the ground and release it into the atmosphere. So surely indigenous presence in the UP did affect the bog, but I don't know how. So the Great Cutover, starting about 1880 to 1900s, did not really affect the Strangmoor Bog that much, but people did go out and cut in a lot of areas at Seney, and then when they would leave the slash on the ground, they would burn that slash. And so those fires would sometimes move out into other adjacent landscapes. So, and they were far more frequent, and they would burn deeper into the soils. So I'm sure that all the logging that occurred did affect the bogs. And also they would go out in the winter because they could actually get around on the refuge. A lot of it was frozen. And then they would float the logs down the river in the spring to Manistee in order to get those logs down there. And okay, so now we're going back to the Walsh ditch. So draining the bog. And I like this picture because you can really see what that ditch did to the bog. So here's the ditch coming in down here, and then it makes a little turn there, and then goes back down. Oh, sorry, not there. It takes a turn, goes over to here, and then down. So they made a 14-mile ditch in order to try and drain the wetlands. And you can see from this photo, all of this lighter area, that's all area that dried up a bit, and then it lost significant amount of peat. So it really did cause a big problem for the bog. And you can see these fingers here on the edge, they're way more prevalent. So my guess is that it probably looked a little bit more like that at one point, but because there was less water there, it might have caused more shrubs and stuff to grow. So, so in, I think it was the late 90s, early 2000s, refuge managers went in and they literally put plugs into the ditch to try and get the water to flow back into that river here. So some of it did work. It did go back into that natural channel. And then they had also hoped that that would help more beavers want to move into the area and take over the project, because beavers love to build dams. So then in 1935, when the refuge started, you would have thought that, you know, it's a National Wildlife Refuge, we're not going to change a lot, we'll just kind of move in and let the land do what it does. But in the 30s, that wasn't the way refuge managers thought about it. In the 30s, they wanted to build pools for ducks and geese. So they went to work. They got the land. They're like, all right, we got a pine island here. We got a pine island here. Let's build a road and dike in between them. So they did kind of like this massive connect-a-dot all across the landscape. And the plan was for the entire 95,000 acres of the refuge to turn it into a whole series of pools. They ran out of time, money, and the CCC and WPA folks that they had helping them. And so they did not make their dreams come true, which was really good for the refuge, actually, because we were able to preserve a lot of that landscape that is so important, like the bogs and stuff. So, but they came in and they were installing water control structures. They were putting in roads and everything else. So they changed it from what it was to what it is today. So in that process, it continued to erode the peat. And I think that this picture was taken in the early 1950s. So it had been a refuge for about 15, 16 years, something like that. At that time, this is one of the guys that worked on the refuge back then. And they called this the waterfall in the refuge. This is sad. So this is all these large peat boulders that are eroding away. So the water is coming across the landscape. I don't know if this was re-flooded after it had been dry for a long time. I'm not really sure of the story here, but the water is moving across the land, and the peat is just breaking off in these big, huge boulders and washing away. So then in 1976, the refuge established a wilderness area, which is where the bog is located, in 1970. And then in 1976, a tree out in that area was hit by a bolt of lightning, and it started a wildfire. And the refuge managers weren't really sure what to do. They didn't have any new plans put together yet on what to do if that happened. So they decided to kind of let the fire burn and see what happened, but it hadn't been burned for probably close to at least a century by that point. So the fire got really big, really fast. It caused a lot of problems for the local community. It cost the Fish and Wildlife Service a ton of money, but they did studies after the burn was done, and they determined that it was actually really good for the landscape. So even though I think when it got off the refuge, I believe it burned down a couple houses and caused some other problems, but it ended up beating back some of the brush, and the bog came back pretty quickly, and it wasn't a bad thing. So just an interesting part of the refuge's history. Today, when we think about stewarding the Strangmoor Bog, it's kind of hands off. Eventually, we will have to, put another fire through that area. But other than that, we mostly think of it as an area to study, do monitoring and research. It's in the wilderness area, so we're not making any plans to build roads or anything out there. And we're also trying to restore the hydrology of the Walsh Ditch. It is not the southernmost string bog, but it is very close to the southernmost string bog. And it is a place where we can take people on a bog near there, because this one's really hard to get to learn about it. So this is my colleague out teaching a class on the different bog plants in an area just to the north of us. And so what are the threats and challenges for the Strangmoor Bog? Well, in other bogs, of course, climate change can affect these landscapes quite a bit, which can cause problems for them because they're also carbon sinks. So if they burn up, that will actually possibly accelerate climate change a little bit. Invasive species moving into them is another problem that could happen. Humans are something, we're always doing something to disturb our landscape. And then, all the different kinds of roads we build and the different projects we do that can disrupt the hydrology. So those are all things that we have to think about that as being threats to landscapes like this. So how can you help wetlands? One thing you can do is support conservation efforts. You're all here tonight, so I know you're passionate about that. You can purchase a duck stamp each year. 98 cents out of every dollar that that is used to purchase a duck stamp helps protect wetlands. So, and a lot of people think of them as you need them to go hunting, but just purchasing them helps with supporting wetlands. Citizen science, if you want to get involved in citizen science, there's always something, whether it be going out and taking pictures and putting them on iNaturalist, or using eBird to record the birds you're seeing, looking for other citizen science initiatives that you can get involved in, staying informed and advocate. Right now, the Fish and Wildlife Service has a policy change that they are trying to implement to change some big portions of the Endangered Species Act. So you can look that up, read about it, and make a comment so that even if that is changed, a judge down the way will see that people were not happy that they wanted to make that change. And then if you ever go visit, just make sure you do so responsibly. Keep the 7 tenets of leave no trace in mind. And then with that, I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have. So. Yeah.
Can you re-explain how the bog iron forms?
Sure. So
That's super interesting.
she was asking how the bog iron forms. So, the iron is in the water. I'm not sure what happens to start it to precipitate from coming out of there, but it will kind of come out of the water probably when it reaches a certain concentration, and then it builds up in like a nugget, and sometimes it can get pretty big. So we have one at the visitor center of the refuge that's probably, it's probably about 40 pounds, and it's a pretty big size. So, yep.
Is the iron in the water just like naturally occurring? Do you know why that is?
Yes, the iron in the water is naturally occurring. There is just the rocks in our ground and sand. It has a lot of iron in it. So, just through natural processes, it comes out of the water out of like the sand and substrate into the water. And if you're ever driving around the refuge and you see some of our pools almost look like cafe au lait or coffee with cream in it, and that's because they don't have a ton of water flow in those areas, and there's an iron-loving bacteria that lives in those, and it makes that cafe au lait coloration. And it's like everyone's like, what is up with that water? It looks really gross. And it's natural, but it looks bad. Yep. Yes?
How do you get there? I mean, and you might not want to say, but if you were at the visitor center,
Mm-hmm.
I assume this would be a long hike.
Yes, it is a very long hike. Let me see if I can get back.
It's probably not going, so don't worry.
Right, yeah, so it would be quite a trek. So let me go back even a few more slides here. So you have to go down on the Creighton Truck Trail, and then which is the, is this one? Nope, that's not the right one. I don't know if I can get back there. Thanks. Okay. There, okay. So, the nearest road, we've got M28 going along here. This is Creighton Truck Trail. So you drive down to about here, and then you've got to hoof it several miles. I think this is about 2 miles into the edge, and then to get into the bog itself, it's like, you're tromping through, water and bog plants, and you're trying to suck your shoes off and everything else. So it's probably a really challenging day if you choose to. Plus, the bugs are not going to be nice to you. But if you want to go to the north, there is one just north that I think would be a lot easier to get to, and it's on state land. Did you have a question?
Yeah, when is the new refuge going to be open?
Well, I can't tell you that because I don't know. They are working on it right now. They're working on the interior of the building. Once the building is completed, then they have to turn it over to the exhibitors, who have 6 months to get everything installed, and then the building can be opened, but I don't know when that will be. So it's been a very long slog with a lot of delays, and I know that's frustrating for everybody, including the staff. So anybody? Yes?
Okay, some of those orchids you showed, are those basically in spring? I mean, is that when they're blooming?
Orchids depends on the species, but they bloom different times of the year. So there are several that bloom in the spring. I'm not sure when those two bloom, but some of them will bloom, like your lady slippers, they usually tend to bloom in the spring.
Yeah.
And then there's other ones like ladies' tresses. I usually see those closer to the fall. There's some lesser purple fringed orchids. I see those usually around July, August, somewhere in there. So it just depends on the species. And I'm not sure about either one of those two because I've never seen them myself. So, yep. Okay. Anybody else have a question? Thank you so much.
Wait, hold on.
Oh, sorry. We got one.
I was just going to ask, are there like dedicated trails that you can walk on, or is it just kind of like you go wherever?
So because it's in the Seney Wilderness area, there are no trails out there. You just kind of have to know what you're doing. You need to know how to orienteer. You're not probably going to get cell phone service, so don't depend on your phone. Make sure you know how to use a compass and take one with you. And that's how you're going to have to use your old-fashioned orienteering skills to get out there. So, and make sure you tell someone before you go, in case something, you hurt yourself and you can't get yourself out, so that they know where you are and can send help. So, okay. Well, I thank you all. There you go.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.